Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, October 5th, 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
It's been too long, Trevor. We haven't done a podcast together in like 2 or 3 weeks now. I've missed you. I've been without you. We did like 4 in like a 48-hour time span, and then we had to take a break afterwards, apparently. How have you been?
Been all right.
How's the
you missed our epic 4.5 hour sojourn through the PlayStation 4 exclusives.
Spoiler alert! I don't actually know who won. Now. So yeah,
it's a good one. And it's not who you would think.
That's what concerns me.
With you not there, we had to go to RNGesus for tiebreakers. So we had to basically go to Google Dice and just roll the dice and say, okay, if it's an even number, this game's going to win in advance, and if it's an odd number, this game's going to win in advance. And that led to a couple of highly chaotic and interesting upsets, I think. I mean, ultimately, the top 4, I stand behind all 4 of the games in kind of the end bracket. It's just like of those 4, who ends up winning. Even there, kind of took some like RNGesus nature. But yeah, it was definitely a fun time, and that'll go live to everybody end of October. But if you can support us for $1 over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, you can get access to that right now. And it's even got a video version where I had I was using and updating the bracket as we went, and you can kind of see those updates. So.
Oh, I like that. We are unfortunately not talking about the best of the best PS4 games this generation today. Trevor, what is our first story today?
Our first story is all about CD Projekt Red. So obviously we're recording this Monday, and the biggest news of the day, or one of the biggest stories of the day, is that CD Projekt Red has gone Cyberpunk 2077 has gone gold, and this kind of is taking over the headlines that broke last week, where CD Projekt Red, despite a year ago committing to avoiding crunch for Cyberpunk 2077, kind of rolled back on that and started insisting on mandatory 6-day work weeks for their team in the lead up to launch. I pulled here from Jason Schreier's Bloomberg article. Following their E3 2019 presentation, CDPR co-CEO Marcin Iwinski told Jason Schreier, while he was at Kotaku at the time, that they would be avoiding mandatory crunch on Cyberpunk 2077, and they were, quote, committed to employees working without overtime. Until last week, when staff received an email from studio head Adam Badowski announcing the, quote, studio is in overdrive, end quote, elaborating that this meant, quote, your typical amount of work and 1 day of the weekend. Badowski continued, quote, I take it upon myself to receive the full backlash for the decision. I know this is in direct opposition to what we've said about crunch, end quote. And then, as I said, they went gold today in advance of their November 19th release date. So those 6-day work weeks will be certainly polishing and addressing bugs and getting patches and stuff ready for launch. So, yep, just the latest in the crunch stories, and it being Cyberpunk. There's been, I think, a different discourse around it because Cyberpunk is so beloved as a studio by gamers, by consumers. They do so many pro-consumer friendly things that, like, their Witcher 3 crunch got drastically overlooked because they did the whole thing of Witcher 3 at launch of like, hey, you're going to get all this DLC for free. We're going to keep adding to the game for a little bit before they ended up doing their, bigger expansion packs that were paid. But a lot of their cosmetic stuff and a few extra missions and stuff got added to the game, and they did a whole letter to fans of the series thanking them and all that stuff. And so they have a whole bunch of goodwill for gamers, and as a result, it seems people are willing to kind of overlook crunch because of that. That's at least the narrative I think I've seen online, is people upset and doing kind of the standard, like, crunch is bad, we shouldn't support crunch, but they were all too happy to jump on the new Cyberpunk commercial that dropped over the weekend with Keanu Reeves in it, and then today is like everybody's like excited for the game going gold, and I tweeted this morning like shout out to the sites that included in their going gold stories, hey, just a reminder, last week they announced that they're crunching on this and they're going to be working 6-day weeks, and that sucks. Instead of, I think, like if we had seen this story kind of break 5 years ago, even in the industry, people would have just been like, hey, they're going gold. Here's the actual release date. So I appreciate that at least some sites are out there, including like the big one I checked was IGN, and they absolutely had it in their story. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Like I personally just wish gamers would like care about this more consistently, because as somebody who's worked in a crunch environment, never in games, of course, but has worked in the like, overtime is just kind of understood as part of the job nature of things. It's not a great environment, and one of the biggest selling points I've had in jobs since has been like, hey, we really try and respect a work-life balance. You're here 40 hours a week, and then you go home and you do whatever you want to do. We're not going to ask you to stay late. We will send you home if we think you're, staying late and doing it. Elsewhere in Jason's story, there were mentions made of people who have already been like working nights and weekends for a year plus. So like they've clearly been crunching, even if it wasn't a mandatory crunch thing on this game. It's just the fact that they had said we're not going to crunch, and now we're crunching, that I think led to some stuff. So what are your thoughts on the week of CDPR?
I think for me, I'm weirdly optimistic about it. Like I feel like we've each been covering games long enough to where like I remember when like studios were like almost it felt like almost praised for crunching, right? Like that was like how dedicated they were to the game kind of thing. And I do think the conversation has really begun to change around crunch. There are always going to be people, I think, who flock to defend a studio because they think someone is, attacking something that they love in this game and kind of the team that made it. But I think genuinely in the last like 12 or so months, and this year in particular, like we've really begun to have a different conversation, a different kind of discussion around crunch in games. And I think studios are not getting away with it in the same way they used to. I think the fact that you are seeing it mentioned in an IGN article about this game's going gold for crying out loud, let alone other sites, let alone us having this kind of conversation in the podcast, like I think we've really begun to see that shift happen. And like, I don't know, I think these things take some time, but I think they've really begun to catch up now on where games and the making of games should have been years ago. And certainly in the discussion of games and how they should be made, right? Like, crunch is a failure of management. And that's a quote that, like, multiple people have said, but, like, you are one of the biggest kind of smacking the drum on that I know of. Like, you constantly kind of say, like, it is a failure of management, it is a failure of leadership, crunch. And you just shouldn't, maybe games shouldn't have dates years in advance because maybe that's just unrealistic for this medium, right? And like as unexciting as that might seem to people, it's just maybe what the best thing is for the people making the games. And I also think that like the people making games might also increasingly understand the negative aspects of crunch, right? And understand the toll it takes on people, right? Like, I love Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog has made so many of my favorite games. But the team at Naughty Dog in 2020 is drastically different than the team at Naughty Dog even in 2013, just 7 years ago. The team has flipped so much. Even from 2016 and Uncharted 4, that team is so different, right? Like, that staff turnover is, I feel like, increasing more and more Naughty Dog. And that doesn't help breed a continuity of the people making the games and creating the games, and it doesn't allow for like this kind of passing of knowledge, I think, at studios when they have this kind of high burnout rate. Eventually, I think that will catch up if you don't fix kind of these inherent problems. And so I think that having these discussions and hopefully it being part of every story about CD Projekt Red, right? Like, I don't know what our kind of coverage plans are for Cyberpunk 2077, but I think no matter what that coverage looks like, it'll probably include mentions of Crunch now. It'll probably include some sort of reference to it, whether it's the spoiler cast or just a review discussion or whatever it might be, or, you know, early impressions of that game. Like, it'll probably include that, and it'll probably touch on this notion while also talking about the game. And I think that's a thing that I'm seeing more and more from the industry that makes me more and more encouraged about the discourse in games going forward.
Yeah, I think there's still. I think, especially on like small sites where we can absolutely get away with that kind of thing. Like, yeah, we'll include mention of that in our conversations around the game. But I think there are still, I mean, like major editors at sites that are basically like, that's the news side of this thing. We're not evaluating that when we're evaluating the, you know, the critical worth of a game or something like that. And so, you know, your IGNs will still leave that out of the eventual review of Cyberpunk 2077. I guarantee that. They like, nobody at that level seems to include kind of that conversation in there. It'll be like in opinion pieces outside of it, but in the review itself, it'll be, you know, left out in the same vein of like, it'll be the Yves Guillemot, apology 4-minute video that doesn't get added to the Ubisoft forward kind of thing. It'll be like, it'll be something that they, you know, write an op-ed piece, write an opinion piece about, but they don't actually make mention of it in the thing that everybody's actually going to be going to IGN to check out that day. Actually, I guess everybody will really be going to check out like the wikis and all that stuff. But both of those, like, you're not going to see that kind of stuff out there because that's just not. That's not what those audiences are going for. Like even, you know, the like us talking about it or the industry talking about crunch in general is such a small segment of the wider gamer like circles that it still, I think, is still having a hard time to break through to. I mean, like, you can go to anytime Jason Schreier tweets about crunch and you'll see all of the, you know, the quote unquote fanboys that are just going to like rain on him and shit on him about crunch in defense of you know, the whatever studio they're supporting or whatever. And there are, you know, plenty of more rational people that are trying to approach the industry and elevate the industry, I think. But I would say we're drastically in the minority still. And most people are either ignorant to these issues or they just don't care. Like they know and they just don't care. Because it doesn't affect them. I think if we've seen anything in 2020, there are millions of people out there that don't give a shit if it doesn't affect them, and they will do whatever, you know, makes them comfortable regardless of how it's impacting other people. So it's disheartening, but I do agree with you that I think there is a shift and we're slowly but surely heading in the direction of that. I don't know if we'll eventually see some kind of like dam breaking moment.
I think so.
That equates to games unionization or something that finally puts an end to these kinds of things. Like, another complicating factor of this particular story is CD Projekt Red, of course, isn't a U.S. studio, so it's not beholden to U.S. labor laws and stuff. And Poland has their own labor laws, and at least they're getting paid for this overtime, which is something that Jason highlights in the Bloomberg article that oftentimes is not reflected in U.S. studios that are crunching and working 78-hour work weeks. They're still getting whatever their normal salary is, and maybe incentives if a game reaches a certain Metacritic score or something like that. But by and large, those people are getting paid the same amount for the 80 hours that they're working that they would if they only worked 40 hours. And that's, you know, infuriating. Like, I am furious for those people. And like one of the other things, obviously, that has come up today. I don't know if you were following. You would have been at work already, so I don't know if you caught this in the gaming Twitter timeline of things today. But basically, there was a big spat between Jason and Paris from Gamertag Radio, who's been appearing on Kind of Funny Things recently and What's Good Games and stuff like that. Jason tweeted out something to the effect of like, in response to the game going gold, I'm excited to play this game, but he made mention of crunch. He alluded to the fact that the developers are, working overtime and working mandatory crunch on it. And Paris, who is, one of the kind of poster children out there for like Cyberpunk love, and he's been, a diehard fan of them probably since that game got announced, kind of quote tweeted Jason and basically like got annoyed that Jason was pushing this agenda instead of just letting Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red celebrate the fact that they went gold. And at that point, I'm like, okay. And then it continues to blow up, and Jason basically says, like, Jason kind of quote tweeted it, saying something to the effect of, like, highlighting that Paris has gotten, one of the Secret Labs gaming chairs from Cyberpunk and stuff, and so it just became like this interpersonal spat between these two. And I just looked at it and saw so much of the Twitter timeline kind of picking sides and all this. I'm like, okay, neither of these guys are behaving great. And they both, I think, have very valid points. Like, I lean more on the side of Jason on this of, I can be excited for a thing while also still trying to hold the developers to task, or hold the management specifically of those developers to task for forcing their workers into this crunch environment. I will never understand why people continue to get furious at Jason about this stuff instead of directing that anger at the managers that are exploiting their workers. It's the same effectively mentality of people getting mad at somebody working at a call center in India and saying they took our jobs instead of getting mad at the manager of the company that is exploiting the lower work rate overseas and firing the people here. It's that just in games. And we see it every time. And so, yeah, Jason, understandably gets frustrated and blocks Paris as kind of the touchstones in that story and whatnot. And I'm just like, I see so many people on my timeline basically like jumping on one side or the other and trying to defend one side or the other. I'm like, I don't like, this is a conversation that I look at immediately. I'm like, this is something we'll talk about on the podcast, I'm sure, because we can actually have a conversation about it and we're not confined to 280 characters at a time. Because, hey, there are some things that you can't really debate in the confines of Twitter, and then this is just the latest of those. But yeah, my take on that whole scenario was just like both guys. Like Paris made it personal first. Like Jason was attacking. If he's attacking anything, he's attacking a developmental system that is allowing this kind of thing, and then Paris attacked Jason for having an agenda instead of like just celebrating the game or whatever. And then Jason took it back and attacked Paris for accepting, a gaming chair, and influencers in general. It turned into the conversation of, how biased is somebody's opinion on that game going to be if they're taking the $400 $500 chairs from Cyberpunk from CD Projekt Red as a gift. Like, obviously that, in my opinion, does play a role and will play a role in some kind of bias towards the game, because you're going to be you associate that chair with this company, and so if you really like that chair and you didn't have to pay $500 for it, that's gonna do something. It might not be a huge thing, and all the credit in the world to the people that acknowledge that and try and like explain to their audience, hey, take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt because I got this great chair from this company, but here are my thoughts on the game as well. But I think too often we see people don't have those kinds of disclosure conversations with their audiences, especially. You see it more on the influencer side of things that doesn't have like a journalistic code of ethics that they're trying to uphold. And so that, like, I always get annoyed when the debate kind of becomes that journalist versus influencer thing, because they're playing by wildly different rules, but one is always expecting the other to play by, the same set of rules. And the audiences are not informed enough to know the difference.
Yeah. I think for me, this is an interesting side topic here where it's so I think that both Paris and Jason obviously have legs to stand on. I think what I'll say is that I routinely like and appreciate and respect the work that Jason does, while maybe not loving the way he does it, or more maybe the tone that he does it with. And I think that's maybe partially what Paris is coming at. I think to Paris, he clearly personalized it first. He made it kind of a personal thing. You could argue, certainly after the first series of tweets, that these are two fully grown men who should each have done better than to keep engaging after a certain point. But yeah, to your point of you don't understand why people direct their anger towards Jason and not the game, it's because they think that what Jason is doing, again, is attacking this thing that they love via the studio that made it, right? Or that they think they will love. In this case, the game's not even out yet, technically, but it's attacking and it's hurting this thing that they think they love. It's the same reason people attack journalists that give a movie a bad score or a game a bad score, or people that criticize works of art that they love in any medium, either before, during, or after the thing has come out, right? I think it's understandable to naturally want to protect this thing that you really appreciate, that you love, especially if that thing has a deep personal connection to you. It can feel hard to not want to lash out at. And I understand that. I think we all inherently understand that feeling. I think also part of what happens when you grow up is that you have to understand that this isn't how adults connect anymore. This isn't how you are an adult now, and this is just not, it's not okay to just get angry or so angry over these things. And that's a process, right? And you can always slip up and get caught in a dumb Twitter, tweet fight feud, and nobody's perfect, obviously, but I think we as gamers are so quick to get angry over the things. I think we're just so quick to get angry, period. You could end the sentence there. But I think we're so quick to get mad, and we're so quick to get angry and defensive about these things that we love, which again makes sense, to be clear. But also we're talking about video games. We're talking about games or movies or books or TV shows, whatever it might be, and it is all right. Look, my best advice for this, for people everywhere, is to just like things that maybe aren't perfect to begin with, and that maybe have bad parts to them, because then you'll never really be that defensive. Just everybody be fans of James Bond and Star Wars, because there's a lot of bad in those two things, and so it's fine. You can't get that upset. That's my best advice. It's this is just such a stupid thing that's so endemic to video games, and I keep thinking we'll get over this at some point in time, but we don't. And the internet obviously is the internet, so it doesn't help at all. But don't get mad at Jason Schreier or Greg Miller or Andrew Renee or whoever it is talking just any sort of objective fact about your game that maybe you don't like, because you like it. It's okay to like something and also hear criticism of it.
And on the flip side, don't get mad at Paris either. Paris is excited
don't
for a
get mad
thing.
At anybody.
And yeah, I'm in this particular scenario, I'm highlighting Paris though as kind of the other side of the coin there. I'm not mad at either of these guys. And
Yes.
and going back to one of the things you touched on earlier of you like what he's doing, but maybe not necessarily his tone. You're inferring his tone from tweets. We don't
Sure.
and that was
Sure.
something that came up today as well, is people were reading his Jason's original tweet as snarky, and he even kind of came back and was like, that wasn't my intent. I wasn't trying to be snarky. And it's one of those things, again, I'm obviously the poster child of being extra sensitive to snark on Twitter, given that I got rid of it from my handle to and rebranded myself away from being snarky because I know that is so often the default that people read into a tweet, that they're gonna go in looking for sarcasm, looking for a reason to hate something. So if you can eliminate that as a barrier to entry, try and do it if you can. But again, like this is just yet another failing of social media. Is like tone does not come across, and so it gets lost in translation, and things that would be just a normal civil back and forth conversation if two people were actually talking it out become completely overblown, and then everybody starts piling on their side, on one side or the other, and all that stuff, and it just it was exhausting. I tweeted, basically I wrote half a dozen tweet responses to the situation itself, to people responding to the situation, to people subtweeting the situation, and like each time I was just like, I'm not going to gain anything out of this if I hit send.
Yep.
I'm just going to it's just going to turn into like a back and forth where we're going to do this thing 280 characters at a time, and I don't want to deal with that. So I eventually just kind of like said, I'm not diving into this debate. Like, and I'm going to log off from Twitter for a little bit. Everybody calm the F down. But yeah, again, I just want to make my point clear that I of these two in this situation in particular, on the crunch conversation, like I think both of them have points, and I think neither of them like were incredibly eloquent in getting their points across to one another or to their respective audiences. And I also I do want to finally mention, I guess, as my last little point on that, is I also respect the perspective that Barrett Courtney from Kind of Funny put out there of like, regardless of what you think on everything, Jason obviously has a bigger audience than Paris, and it's a little bit of a dick move for Jason to punch down. But I would also say, like, Jason, if he doesn't know Paris, which he would later come out and like say after the fact he doesn't know Paris at all. He didn't know that he's, an industry person or anything like that. He gets this amount of shit anytime he writes a story out. And so, yeah, if he's gonna occasionally pick, somebody from the industry to highlight and chastise when they attack him. Like it's not an uncommon thing in quote tweeting culture, I guess. So, but yeah, it's a bad situation, and I whatever. It'll be forgotten about in a week. Especially by the time the game comes out, and I was going to be thinking like, oh, hey, remember when Paris and Jason got into that spat over this game? Like, nobody's going to care.
I agree with that. Barrett, smart kid, a lot of smart takes. So, and other non-CD Projekt Red news, you heard about the Spider-Man game, Trev? Because the internet was abuzz all about Spider-Man last week, and not for any fun or enjoyable reason. But speaking of people getting angry for maybe not completely rational reasons, Spider-Man...
I mean, that's been the Spider-Man story on PlayStation 4.
The Spider-Man Miles Morales remaster, remake, whatever you want to call it, thing on the PS5. Peter Parker got a new face, looks somewhat similar to Tom Holland. And people...
See, you put that in there, and I immediately put in eye roll emoji. Because I saw that conversation going around. I don't see it personally.
I said somewhat.
Yes.
I think it's like I can get it, I guess, but like it's here's the thing for me. Here's my right off the gate, shooting from the hip hot take. I just think this Peter looks not as good. Like I just it's like I just look at him like this one doesn't look as good, but like okay, and then I was like it's a weird decision. The more interest, like an actual interest in take, and it's the story I put in our doc that you can see in the show notes, is from VentureBeat. Let me pull it up here. It's like their closing paragraph where it talks about how, it like how it brings up the question of like just how much games should change after release. Like patches give developers this is all a quote. Patches give developers an opportunity to tweak their titles long after launch. A big remaster like this one for Spider-Man gives the studio a chance to make even more changes, but is replacing the hero's face going too far? I know if I saw a Spider-Man movie 2 years after it first came out and Peter Parker had a new face, I'd be beyond distracted, end quote. And, like, that's obviously, like, an a lot thing, but, like...
It's the guns to walkie-talkies conversation from E.T.
Like, it's... Oh, yeah! Yeah, that's a good... Yeah. Damn, Trevor, that's a good reference. I think for me...
Or, I mean, like, I guess the most iconic one would be the Han shot first, like,
shot
switch
first,
in Star Wars, of course.
Or it's just Jabba goes from a human to a slug. I think for me, it's one of, like... I wouldn't have done this just because it's completely unnecessary. Just right out of the gate. It's just, like, a weird decision to do. And, like... It's maybe, like, conspiracy theorist, but, like, I definitely don't think this is the full story of why they switch faces. Like, I just don't, because it's just so, such a random thing to do.
We haven't touched at all on the reason that they've given for switching faces. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, like, it's just, what's the exact, let me pull up again, like,
basically, the reasoning behind it is...
match Yuri's voice acting.
Yeah. Yuri Lowenthal, who is the performer of Spider-Man in Marvel's Spider-Man for PS4 and now the remaster in PS5. And I want to clarify that too. This is everything they've put out so far is basically saying, like, this is the new look for Peter in PS5 stuff moving forward. So specifically, he was confirmed, like, this is what Peter is going to look like in the remaster on PS5. You would assume he's also going to pop up in Miles Morales somewhere, and so he's going to match that. But I believe they've said they're keeping the original face capture by actor John Bubniak, I believe was the actor's name. He's going to stay in the PS4 version. They're not patching him out. They're just changing it in the remaster. But yeah, the reasoning that they've given is Yuri Lowenthal, who plays Peter and plays Spider-Man, has apparently a very distinct bone structure that this new actor's face matches better, so that they will be able to better animate and better capture the like the points of articulation in Peter's face in this guy versus in the PS4 version's performance. And so, like, I look at that, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, it's a weird choice, but I get it. And if recasting it and remodeling the character is going to save animators a ton of work and time because this guy's face just maps better to Yuri's face, then cool. Like, that's a good enough reason for me. I don't personally need to dive into the conspiracy theories behind, everything else or whatever. And like, I'm fine with that, especially the things I said kind of when this came out, like, from Puddles to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man suit to this now, like, Spider-Man is having to deal with so many stupid, pointless controversies. And I feel so bad for that team, specifically like the community management side of that team. But like, it's ultimately like the original Peter. I mean, Peter in the game is supposed to be 23 years old. He got the powers at 17, I think, and he's been Spider-Man for 6 years in the game. So he's, grad student, late grad student, or early, post grad kind of levels. And comparing the PS4 version and now the PS5 version side by side, like the other guy looks older. He always looked like late 20s to me, compared to the new person, who certainly looks younger, and the Tom Holland comparison, given that Tom Holland is 24, that's about the age you want this guy looking, really, I guess. So, like, go for it. The actor himself is 26, so even he is still a couple years older than the character, but he does have that younger face. So yeah, I like the theories around, like, oh, they're just trying to make the character look like Tom Holland. Like, he doesn't look that much like that argument. He doesn't look like that much like Tom Holland to me, and I didn't like that argument around the conversation of Marvel's Avengers of, like, oh, these are just knockoff MCU characters, because, like, it's, yes, of course we've had 20 movies with these actors and the MCU characters to get attached to. In PS4 or in Spider-Man, you've had a game to get used to what that Peter looked like. So yeah, it's gonna look weird looking at a new person saying those things, being that character, and being that character moving forward. I mean, I guess since it's on my mind, since Kind of Funny's doing Batman in review, did people get like super weirded out when Val Kilmer took over for Michael Keaton as Batman? Like, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to like the world at the time of films and stuff, but like it's just a recasting. It happens. Like I don't think we need to lose our minds over it like some people clearly did when this broke last week.
So I think that that's all true, and as you put, no one's going to care about this and actually play the game. No one's going to care. Just readily, no one's even going to care. I think I actually like the other Peter Parker more because I view Spider-Man PS4 as a little bit like Arkham, or we're playing a Peter. I think deliberately so. Like we're playing a Peter who's been Spider-Man for years and has like this kind of whole like the comic history is kind of here. Like with Arkham, you've had like the whole history beforehand. So I actually liked the older looking Peter for that reason because he felt like he'd been it for a few years. The new Peter, I think, looks not 23, but I think he looks like a 17-year-old kid. I think he looks really young. But ultimately, as I kind of said, like, as you said, it's all completely irrelevant because it's Spider-Man and he's going to have a mask on for a lot of the game when you're actually playing it, first off. Second off, he won't even be the main character in the Miles Morales thing. Yeah, and third off, it's still the same voice. Yeah, like so, like it's like you're gonna be Miles Morales in the Miles Morales game. Peter will make probably sporadic appearances. It's gonna be okay, and then like Trevor said, people recast all the time, and also, I think about all of the times people got really angry about casting decisions in superhero movies, and they worked out really well. This will not be one of those cases because he's just a face and has no other acting thing that he's doing. But even still, it's going to be okay. You won't notice. I promise you. Like, it's going to be okay. Like, it's Spider-Man. Just enjoy swinging around New York City. I mean, I should play Spider-Man again. Just enjoy playing around New York City. It's great. It's an awesome game. Enjoy it.
I'm super excited to, and this came up on our epic 4.5 hour best game of the PS4 conversation. Like, the fact that I'm going to be able to, in a little over a month, hop in and replay Spider-Man on PS5 with, in updated graphics, and get, a new trophy set and platinum and all that stuff. Like, I am absolutely excited to have a reason to hop back into that game.
I never finished the first when I played it the first time.
On the new gen. Well, that was silly. Why didn't you do that? You're really bad at finishing games these days.
I think it was that was 2 years ago, and so I think it was Game of the Year. So I was trying to like play a lot of things at once. I was just trying to like jump into things and get a feel for it, like by the end, because I'd pushed it off. Great game. Was IP's game of the year.
I played that game, and then they did that thing that a lot of the game studios are doing these days, where it's like, hey, it's a month or two later, and we've released a new game plus finally, and to try and get you back to play it, we added new trophies. And so like my platinum and my percentage on that game suddenly went from being like 100% to like 93% or whatever. And I was like, damn it. Because it was like only two trophies. It was beat the game on New Game Plus and beat the game on the new Insanity difficulty or whatever. And I was like, do I really want to do that? And I ended up sitting down and doing it. Like I loaded up, my a New Game Plus. So I had all of my powers basically already unlocked and everything from having beaten the game already, and I just went through and just kind of like had a great time enjoying. Like combat was definitely sucked getting back into combat with every fight being a pain in the ass of Insanity difficulty, but once I got kind of over the hurdle of that, it was a good time. I didn't have to worry about doing like all the side things for just that like run of the game. So I just kind of mainlined the story and had a ton of fun hopping back into it. So that's one, I've already played through that one twice. And so I look forward to, like I'm probably going to revisit a whole bunch of games, the end of this year. because as you know, as great as new systems are, they are also a dearth of of actual new content. So I have a few of the new system games, a few of the new games pre-ordered and ready to go. But I'm absolutely going to take advantage of like the PlayStation Plus collection and Game Pass Ultimate to visit or revisit some of the games, in November and December when there isn't a whole bunch of other ton of new stuff out there. Obviously, Cyberpunk being like the glaring exception to that. I'm sure I will also be playing a ton of Cyberpunk.
But that's all I got for Spider-Man. So that's a show.
Question for you. So
I have an answer
one of the other
for you,
things,
maybe.
one of the other things that was floating around on the idea of this redesign is, do you think this redesigned Peter Parker shows up in Marvel's Avengers as the PS4, PS5 exclusive Spider-Man character?
No.
Yeah, I don't either, but I figured I'd throw it out there as food for thought.
It is interesting. That's like an interesting theory, but like, no, I just don't. I don't.
Yeah.
I have a shout out, and by shout out, it's not really a shout out for you, the listener. It's a shout out for Trevor Starkey.
Uh-oh.
And it's less a shout out and more a reminder, and me offering him a date. The shout out is from Polygon.com. And it is Ghost of Tsushima multiplayer and New Game Plus arrives October 16th. So mark it on your calendar, folks. We're going to have a date night with T. Starks. It's going to be real cute. That's all.
I mean, I enjoyed that game, and I'm happy to hop into multiplayer. But like, I was not looking for multiplayer from that experience. So it's like
I wasn't.
Okay,
I'm not either. But like,
we'll do
it's
whatever
gonna be
this
fun.
is. But
yeah,
sure. I'm down.
Otherwise,
we eventually still need to. Like, I don't know where you're at on that game, but like you, me, and Cam still need to sit down at some point and do like kind of like our spoiler cast thoughts on Ghost of Tsushima.
When is this? October 16th.
Once you beat it.
Because
Because like Cam and I beat the game a while ago now, and Cam started hopping through a non-Kurosawa mode playthrough, and immediately was like, "Oh my god, it's so beautiful."
Let's try to do. For sure, we'll do a spoiler cast for the end of the month. Maybe that weekend after the 16th. Look at that.
All right, maybe. I mean, it all
put that in
depends
calendar
on
in Slack.
where you're at in the game, really. Because
Put that in Slack.
The further we get away from it, the more things start to slip away from me. Because I beat that game like 2 months ago now or whatever. So like I can still speak to some things, but I'll be leaning on you guys that are certainly it's fresher on you. Whenever we sit down and have that conversation. So
we'll look at that. That's what we'll look at. But that is the show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons have. Your support means the world to me. We take it very seriously and are very grateful for it every day. It makes shows like this one and like that D+ happen. They wouldn't be here without your Patreon support. And they keep the whole operation running. So again, we're very, very endlessly thankful for you. And if you like what you heard, again, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite to support us. You can also go like, subscribe, and share on podcast services around the globe, and rate and review us on iTunes. It really does help for newer shows like this. Although now we're 23, we can drink now on this podcast, and so it helps a lot. We appreciate it immensely. We want to get into the top 100 shows in Australia, so please let's make it happen together. You can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to say, plug, or shout out?
Yeah, so this is going out Wednesday. If I understand correctly, I was on One Big Topic with Mario Piquadio, and that should have gone live yesterday as of this publishing, tomorrow as of us recording it. So you can go check out me and Mario talking about the quote-unquote dream of getting into the industry and how that has shifted over time for me, how it's shifted over time for him, and kind of what our respective journeys and paths have been. It was fun kind of diving into kind of the 5-year trajectory that led me from that. Almost 6 years now, I guess. That first PSX that I attended back in the end of 2014, all the way up through kind of here as we approach the anniversary of That Nerdy Site, and kind of everything in between. So check that out.
Sounds like a very good conversation. I actually will check that out. Sounds really nice. You can go find me at Lefty Logan on the internet. I will plug a podcast I was also on, which was with John Opek. Comedy Rewind. We talked about City Slickers, which I not inadvertently, but I really, really love, which Jono did not know, the full depth of my love of City Slickers, and just by extension, Billy Crystal, who I am a huge fan of. That movie is still great. It still holds up, and is still very much a dramedy with a lot of heart to it. Real world beautiful. So go check that out as well. That is up somewhere on the internet. Jono tweets out every other day. And just go support all the boys at We Are 8-Bit. You can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. Tweet at us. Let us know what you would like for the upcoming year 2 of That Nerdy Site. Any ideas, suggestions, comments, thoughts, anything you might have for us, we'll be happy to hear them. And until next time, play your games and be good to each other.